of ISIS violating Islam by cutting off people's heads. That, my friends, is an abomination not to Judaism, and not to Christianity, not to atheism, not to agnosticism. It is an abomination to Islam.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Sir JR ng Usap Usap University at kung ikaw po ay baguhan, ikaw po ay newcomer, tuloy po. Welcome po sa atin pong channel. Sa ating channel tayo po ay nagre-review, tayo po ay nagbibigay ng reaction sa mga diskusyon o mga debate. At sa ating episode ngayon, very special, very timely dahil po ilang araw lang po nakakaraan, inatake po ng grupong HAMAS. Sila po ang organisasyon na napapalakad po ng Palestine at sila nga po ay umatake. According po sa mga reports, ilang libo po ng mga rockets po ang kanila pong pinadala at pinatama sa Israel at ang Israel po ay hindi po handa dahil meron po silang Jewish holiday kung kaya naisipan po nating magbigay ng reaksyon sa isang napakasikat po na debate sa pagitan po ng mga pro-Israel at mga anti-Israel naman at ito po ay naganap sa Oxford University, isa po sa mga pinakasikat, pinakamaalam po na universidad sa buong mundo. Isang paalala lang po na ang debate po ay nasa wikang Ingles at hindi ko po itatranslate po ang lahat. Ito po yung difficulty sometimes kapag English po yung debating pinapanood po natin. In fact, sa atin pong previous episodes, what we do is binibigyan po natin ng reaction in English. Pero for now, dahil sa palagay ko napaka-timely po at meron po talagang demand po kasi sa ating Facebook po. So I decided na why not listen to those who are pro and against dahil ang kanilang paksa po ay pinag-uusapan po mismo ang Hamas. At ang debate po na ito ay naganap po ilang taon na pong nakakaraan. At like what I said, I think this is just timely sa mga balita po ngayon dahil umiinit na naman po ang tension, ang political tension na sobrang tagal na po talaga at almost hindi na maayos-ayos. Ano po, ilang centuries, actually thousands of years na po ang pinagmulan po ng away na ito at kaguluhan sa bansang Israel. Pero sa konting background po sa akin pong pag-aanalisa ng debate na ito, ako po ay dating university debater mula po sa MSU-IIT sa loob po ng 3 taon. Ako rin po ay nagdebate sa ABS-CBN News Channel, kalaban ko po Lasal at FEU at ako rin ay isang membro ng isang international public speaking organization na Toastmasters International. So atin pong papanoorin muna ang isang short po na feature ng Stand for Truth para po magkaroon po tayo ng background at pagkatapos po niya ng actual debate po, 2-on-2 debate daw po ito patungkol nga sa Hamas. So ano pang hinihintay natin? Let's watch this video together. Let's go!
Gulo ang bumalot sa Israel at Palestine. Mga gusali at bahay, wasak. Mga inosenteng buhay, napahamak. Buong mundo nakaantabay. Ano nga ba ang ugat ng krisis na binabantayan ng lahat? Nakailang ulit nang naggantihan ng dahas ang dalawang estado, pero ang gulong ito ang isa sa mga pinakamalala mula noong 2014. Ilang linggo ang nakalipas panahon ng Ramadan, hinarangan ng mga sundalong Israeli ang lagusan sa Old City sa East Jerusalem. May mga banal na lugar sa loob nito kung saan sana mananalangin ang mga Muslim na Palestinian. Pero sa halip na dasal, sigaw ng protesta ang namutawi sa kanilang mga bibig habang ginigipit sila ng mga otoridad.
At the same time, nag-overlap din ito dun sa so-called Jerusalem Day. No? So ito yung isang day na sincelebrate ng mga far-right Israeli groups after the occupation of East Jerusalem in the 1960s war.
Ilang kilometro lang mula sa Old City, may kabahayang sentro na rin ng tensyon. Gustong palayasin ng isang right-wing Jewish group ang mga Palestinong nakatira roon. Para sa Israel, problema lang ito sa lupa. Pero sa mata ng Palestine, ethnic cleansing ito, pagpapalaya sa kanila para mga Israeli na lang ang matira.
So that was also something very, very sensitive for the Palestinian people, and they saw that as another manifestation of the oppressive situation that they're facing.
Bumalik tayo sa panahong wala pang estado ng Israel. Nagsilikas mula sa paniniil ng mga Nazi ang mga Hudyong nasa Europa. Marami sa kanila bumalik sa pinaniniwalaan nilang lupang pangako. Pero may nakatira na rito at sakop pa ng Britanya ang lupain. Para sa isang Pilipinong minsan nang nasaksihan ang sitwasyon sa Palestine, may problema rin sa Zionism, ang ideolohiya ng maraming Jewish refugees noon.
What do you say to splitting this country into two? You keep your half and you all move there. That's yours to keep. But we now occupy this other half. That would be such an arbitrary, strange, and unfair proposition.
Dumami ang mga Hudyong tumira sa historic Palestine. Matapos ang World War II, pinaubayan ng Great Britain ang lupain sa kabubuo pa lang na United Nations. Binago ng UN ang mapa. taong 1948 nang maging estado ang Israel.
That's precisely what happened in the Zionist colonization of Palestine, ultimately, culminating in the establishment of the State of Israel. It's a settler colonial enterprise that sought to erect a new state over a land that was already existing as the homeland of another people, of many people.
Pagdating sa Pilipinas, let's not forget that the country was a deciding, if not the deciding vote in the establishment of the State of Israel. No?
Hindi masaya ang mga Palestino sa naging hatian ng lupa, kaya't nagkaroon ng digmaan. Nanalo ang Israel. Ang itinuturing nitong kalayaan, siya namang naging pagdurusa ng Palestine. Halos 700,000 sa kanila ang itinaboy ng digmaang ito. Sila ang bagong refugees, nawalan ng lugar sa lupang matagal na nilang pinanirahan, habang ang Israel nilawakan ang sakop nitong teritoryo. Bagamat karumal-dumal na krimen ang nangyaring Holocaust sa mga Hudyo, tingin ni Luther hindi dapat ito dahilan para sila naman ang mang-apak sa karapatang pantao ng iba.
Because anti-Semitism is of course a very bad thing that we must all condemn. But the same values that bring us to condemn anti-Semitism, that also informs our stand against Zionism.
Pero sa pagdaan ng panahon, lalo lang pinaigting ng Israel ang kontrol nito. Kinamkam nila ang lupaing dapat sana ay sa Palestine at hinigpitan din nila ang paggalaw ng mga Palestino.
So there's a sense that Arab Israelis, even if they're citizens, they're also oppressed residents, and they're also not enjoying equal democratic rights and privileges.
Almost every day I was there were incidents of intimidation and ordering Palestinians around with guns pointing at them.
Sinubukang pagkasunduin ang Israel at Palestine, pero nakisawsaw ang Amerika sa usapan.
So far, ang accusation ng Palestinians and a lot of Muslim countries and a lot of progressive groups is that countries like the United States have not acted as a neutral mediator. And in fact, they treat Israel as a treaty ally.
May mga Palestinong galit na rin. Isa sa mga nabuong grupo, ang Islamist fundamentalist na Hamas. Sila ang nagpalipad ng mga rocket sa Israel. Noong May 15, sinabi ni Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu na patuloy ang airstrikes hanggat kailangan. Pero ceasefire ang gusto ng global leaders. Nitong Biyernes, nagkasundo ang Israel at Hamas sa tigil putukan. Dahil sa kahit anong digmaan, walang ibang talo kundi ang mga inosenteng mamamayang namumuhay sa takot.
Getting ceasefire is one thing, but ang kailangan talaga dito is pumunta tayo dun sa pinakaugat ng problema, the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people, and also addressing the concerns of Arab Israelis with respect to what they feel as discrimination against them, systematic discrimination against them, and their marginalization.
At para kay Luther, kahit malayo man ng Israel at Palestine sa Pilipinas, hindi nagkakalayo ang ating kasaysayan at ang karanasan ngayon ng mga inaapi.
We too have seen the way that a colonial power has made life difficult for us as a people. What the Palestinian people are experiencing today, it's part of the long global history of colonialism, and the resistance that they carry out against it now is part of that long global history of resistance against colonialism as well.
Hindi lang basta agawan ng lupa o palakasan ng armas ang nangyayari sa Israel at Palestine. Tunggalian ito sa pagitan ng mananakop at ng nasasakupan.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, ito na po yung atin pong debate. At paalala lang po, ito po ay sa wikang Ingles. Yung atin pong primer kanina, that was the presentation of Stand for Truth na isa pong GMA show. Pero ito na yung actual na source video po natin mula po sa YouTube channel na Oxford Union. So bago lang po muna natin panoorin, very interesting sa akin yung mga nasabi po sa primer nga na binigay ng Stand for Truth na tayo ang UN deciding vote. Tandaan po, isa po tayo sa mga pinakauna na mga bansa po na miyembro po ng UN. At noong 1948 nga, nakatulong po yung boto ng Pilipinas para maging estado ang Israel noong 1948. Interesting para sa akin na na-mention ni Professor Richard Heyderian, which is someone that I know personally, na-mention niya nga po na even within Israel, yung mga Arab Israelis po ay oppressed din po, yun po ang sinasabi niya. So 2 points sa kinakailangan na gawan ng action talaga. Ano yung root cause? Hindi sapat yung ceasefire para sa kanya. Ano yung root cause talaga ng problema? Na-mention niya rin yung right to self-determination ng estado ng Palestine. At yun nga yung karapatan ng mga Arab Israelis mismo sa loob ng Israel. So yun po ang ating mga pag-uusapan ngayon at ito na ang debate, ang Hamas ba ay greater threat than Israel? Yun po ang ating papanoorin sa start po ng kanilang debate.
And I hope my accent enables my words to be heard as clearly as I hope to present them. I find it remarkable. Two things were remarkable, I must say, when I was first invited. One is I actually did not believe the proposition. It was, and I read it, this House believes that Hamas is a greater threat to peace than Israel. And I give you my word of honor, I actually called Oxford, I went online, I couldn't believe this was an actual proposition. You mean that's debatable? I actually thought for a moment that pro-Israel forces at Oxford had somehow put this into the lineup, as we call it in America, when you put a lineup for your players on your team. I was stunned. The other was when I realized, by God, they really are serious. It must be an academic institution. And I realized, as Orwell said, some things are so foolish, only an intellectual could believe them. And I realized, okay, this is it. This is a Western world tragedy, the amount of nonsense that is often believed in academia. And so this is a debatable proposition at such an illustrious institution. It's actually sad, as I will point out over and over, just appealing to your common sense. You need know nothing about the Middle East to understand how absurd the proposition is. It's of course valid, but that it's debatable is an absurdity. The other is my biography. I must say I have been called many things, including controversial, but of my long resume, just to be described as controversial, may I say to you that to the millions of people that I broadcast to every day, I am not controversial whatsoever. So clearly, those who invited me find it controversial. All right. Let me just give you an analogy. I didn't check, I should have. In the 1930s, was there a debate at this auspicious place? Was there a debate over the following proposition? That Nazi Germany, that Great Britain is a greater threat to peace than Nazi Germany, or Nazi Germany is a greater threat to peace than Great Britain. Was there a debate in the 1930s? That is a perfect analogy to what we are debating tonight. Nazi Germany is to Israel what Nazi Germany was to Britain, what Hamas is to Israel. Whether you agree with Israeli policies or not, and I don't agree with all Israeli policies, it is irrelevant. The question is that analogy fair? So let me ask you a question. I'll take you in a moment. Actually, in 2 moments. But let me begin. Who is the...
Okay, before that, okay, technicalities po muna tayo sa debate ha. Bakit po tumayo yung babae kanina kung napansin nyo? Dali, balik natin ng saglit. So, pansinin nyo po, di ba? Tumayo po yung babae dito. Pansinin po. Okay. See? There you go. Tumayo po yung babae dito. Bakit po meron pong pagtayo? Bakit may nangyayari pong ganito sa debate? Ang tawag po dito is point of information. So isa pong debate, pwede pong magtanong at pwedeng tumayo ang isang debater. Ito po yung kanilang format. Ano po, hindi po ito yung common po na kunwari ay Oxford, Oregon format na kung saan wala pong points of information. Ito po, ang tawag po dito, nag-raise po siya ng point of information. Sa isang formal po na debate, minsan po ang ginagawa po namin, we'll put our left hand and then raise our right hand to the person speaking. At ang ibig sabihin po noon, naghihingi po kami ng recognition na mabigyan po ng oras na magsalita at mag-clarify po ng mga tanong. So, or pwedeng magbigyan ng konting komento. So, ito po yung nangyayari po dito. Kaya po nakatayo po yung babae dito. She is raising a point of information. And syempre, pwedeng i-accept or not ng speaker. Yung speaker po, syempre, yung nagsasalita po na debater dito, si Prager, siya po yung debater dito at speaker, at he can acknowledge the point of information or not. So, most likely, hindi po yun ina-acknowledge. But tingnan natin.
Question. I'll take you in a moment.
I'll take
Actually,
you in a moment.
in 2 moments. But let me begin. Who is the greater threat to peace? Let's forget Israel, okay? Who is the greater threat to peace in Syria? ISIS or Israel? Who is the greater threat to peace in Lebanon? Hezbollah or Israel? Who is the greater threat to peace in Egypt? The Muslim Brotherhood or Israel? Do you understand? In every case, everyone in this room would acknowledge that ISIS is a greater threat to peace in Syria than Israel. In every person in this room, I have to believe, even Professor Shlaim, would have to agree that ISIS is a greater threat, that the Muslim Brotherhood is a greater threat, and that Hezbollah is a greater threat. All of a sudden, we change the entire scenario because it is now Hamas instead of Hezbollah or ISIS or Muslim Brotherhood. Number two, on this issue, just appealing to your common sense. In modern history, every war has been between a free state and a police state or two police states. I cannot think of a 20th century example of any other. And the same holds true here. You have the police state of Hamas. If you differ with Hamas, they kill you. Where in the world other than Israel does anyone ever argue that the free state doesn't want peace and the police state wants peace? There is no other example on earth. There is no other example on earth of a country targeted for extinction. None. 220 some odd countries in this world. Only Israel is targeted for extinction. And we have a debate on whether the state targeted for extinction is the barrier to peace.
Pero yun nga, just going back on the primer earlier by Stand for Truth, hindi ba dahil nakamkam at lumawak na ang teritoryo ng Israel ay komportable na sila at okay na sa kanila yon? Kumbaga, ipagkibit-balikat na lang ba natin at hayaan na lamang yung mga nangyari na quote-unquote injustice kung meron man sa Palestine? Dahil nga, kung titinan po natin sa teritoryo, dahil po ang UN po ang nagbigay ng desisyon patungkol sa pag-establish ng Israel noong 1948, hindi ba lugi ang mga Palestinians noon na kung saan sila yung tinuturing na inhabitants ng lugar na ito even prior to the World War? Tinitingnan lang po natin at tinatry nating i-weigh based sa ating pong pananaw lamang po.
That is quite a leap of faith. In the age of beheadings, as you have tragically experienced here in the UK, we have a debate. Hamas is a kindred spirit to ISIS and Hezbollah and Boko Haram. What do you think, they're an exception? All of those are monstrous. But Hamas, they're a terrific bunch who really want peace. If it only weren't for settlements. There were no settlements prior to 1967. Why wasn't there peace? Israel would dismantle the settlements for real peace in a moment because the Israeli people are much more interested in sending their kids to college and in having a peaceful life and in making a good living and inventing more medical and technological devices than they are in fighting wars. This would be the first free state in history to prefer war to peace. It is highly, highly unlikely. The Hamas covenant, which you heard from Adam earlier, the Hamas covenant, is
Okay, before that, very interesting, no? So, meron po tayong strategy po sa debate, ang papipaint po ng kabilang side as a weak na stance or illogical na stance. So, ang tawag po dyan yung paggawa po ng strawman, yung strawman fallacy po. Napansin niyo po yung strategy ni Dennis dito na kinukumpara niya na inaatake niya mismo yung proposition na ang proposition kasi is ang Hamas is greater threat than Israel. Para sa kanya, hindi na dapat magkaroon pa ng pagbigay ng attention sa ganitong proposition. Para sa kanya, it's unimaginable na ang pagkukumpara sa Hamas at sa Israel, yun ang kanyang perspective dito. Ang Israel ay isang free state at ang gusto nito ay for peace. It is highly unlikely na ang gugustuhin ng Israel ay hindi kapayapaan. At sinabi niya nga na ang Hamas ay monstrous. Ang Hamas ay katulad ng iba pang mga terrorist groups, mga police state din katulad ng iba. Para sa kanya, yung police state katulad ng Hamas, ito yung nagkukos ng kaguluhan. Hindi ang katulad ng bansang Israel na isang free state. Sinabi niya sa buong mundo, ang cause ng conflict ay dalawa. Ang konsepto ng free versus police state or dalawang police state. Ang nangyayari dito, para sa kanya, ang pagkategorize niya ng Israel ay ang free state na ang gusto ay kapayapaan at police state na Hamas na gusto ay hindi kapayapaan.
It says Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. If I could have extra time over 8 minutes, I would take your question, but I have too much to get through. The Islamic resistance movement is a distinguished Palestinian movement whose allegiance is to Allah and whose way of life is Islam. It strives to raise the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine. Yale University translation. I'm sure they didn't use inch in the original.
On that exact point.
So that is what Hamas is devoted to. Now, yes, I can. Oh, then please.
So all of the organizations that you're citing as a threat to peace just happen to be Arab and or Muslim. Could you explain to me why you think that might be the case, that you only view these organizations as threats to peace?
I don't. Okay. Obviously, those of you who applauded perceived the profundity of the question that I didn't. I don't quite understand. They are all a threat to peace. That is correct. Why did I only pick on Arab Muslim? I said Boko Haram. That is not Arab.
Arab and or Muslim?
Yes, Arab and or Muslim. That is correct. The only beheading groups in the world today, to the best of my knowledge, are Arab or Muslim.
Why do you think that is, in your estimation?
Why do I think that is? Sad to say, it was answered by Arab intellectuals at the United Nations, because the Arab world is a benighted place at this time. The status of women is particularly low. The Arab world translates fewer books in a year than in 10 years than Greece. The entire Arab world translates fewer books than Greece does in 1 year. There is no interest in the foreign world. It is a benighted world, the Arab world. It is a tragedy. This is not anti-Arab. If you love Arabs, you have to understand how low the moral level of the Arab world at this point is. And that has nothing to do with individual Arabs who may be saintly, but that is the dominant moral state. You are taught that you cannot judge civilizations as if Britain and Mali are on the same moral level. That is to give up on hope for humanity, to claim that there is no civilization that has produced something better than something else. So that is the tragic reason. They're not beheading people in Western civilization. They are in the Arab and Muslim worlds, and not the entire Muslim world. Now, why then? My second part is to answer the question, why is something so obvious that Israel wants peace and that Hamas wants to destroy Israel? Why is that debated at one of the most illustrious academic institutions on earth, Oxford? I have two answers. One is, there has been a broken moral compass in the intellectual world in the West for the last perhaps 80 or 100 years. I will give you an example. I studied at Columbia University at the School of International Affairs. I was taught by brilliant, and they were brilliant, professors that the United States and the Soviet Union were moral equivalents. It was capitalism versus communism. Two economic theories, that's all. Neither was better than the other. You may not recall because you weren't born, many of you, but Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, called the Soviet Union at one point an evil empire. He was lambasted. He was declared by Columbia and Harvard and Yale and Princeton and the New York Times a fool for having the temerity to make a moral statement about the Soviet Union, a place that had created the Gulag Archipelago and killed 40 million of its own people, not to mention a genocide in Ukraine. That is what I tell you, students, that's what has taken over in Western universities, a broken moral compass that truly calls evil good and good evil. I went through this, and I'm afraid many of you are going through this. This evening is one such example. And finally, the media. The media gives you a jaundiced view of the world. Gaza starts a war to kill as many Israelis as possible. And all you see on the BBC and Sky News, as we see in America on our TV, is dead Gazans. That's all you see. I shudder to think if in World War II the same media covered World War II, you would have seen far more dead German civilians than dead British civilians. But it takes a very, very frail moral mind to believe that you determine right and wrong by the number of dead. That's what we are told. Look at how many Gazans were killed and how few Israelis. Well, look at how few Brits were killed and how many more Germans were. Does that make the Germans right in World War II? That's the facile moral thinking that pervades our world. So I end with this, and that is, it would be a tragedy, in my opinion, if it came out, if it were known, the Oxford Union actually determined that Israel and not Hamas were the greater threat to peace. Outside of the world of academia, it is pretty clear. It's got to be clear here too. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the motion before this House.
Gusto ko yung nasabi niya kung bakit nangyayari pa ito, na para sa kanya, it's unfair. Bakit mo bibigyan ng comparison, pagkakapareho ang Hamas at Israel on the same level para masabi na one is a threat to peace than the other. Para sa kanya, it's just not fair. And he is telling the reason why. So, broken kasi daw ang moral compass natin. Broken ang ating moral code kung saan sa ating panahon ngayon, para sa kanya, hindi na natin ma-identify ano yung tama at mali. At minsan, ang tama nagiging mali, ang mali ay nagiging tama para sa kanya. At ito rin ay napupush para sa kanya ng media. Para sa kanya, yung mga pinapakita ng media is mas marami yung namamatay na mga taga-Gaza kumpara sa mga namamatay na taga-Israel. Pero sabi niya nga, nung panahon ba ng World War II, nung mas maraming namatay na mga Germans, sinasabi din ba natin na tama ang mga Germans dahil mas maraming namatay sa kanila? So yun ang sinasabi dito ni Mr. Prager. Gusto ko yung sinasabi niya na outside ng world of the academe, outside sa mga universidad na para sa kanya ay na-poison na yung mga utak ng nasa kolehiyo, kung common sense lang ang papairalin para sa kanya, ay talagang hindi na dapat isipin pa na threat sa peace ang Israel. So tingnan natin kung paano i-oppose iyan ni Professor Avi Shlaim. Siya yun naman yung magsasalita in favor of Hamas kumpara sa Israel.
Is preposterous because it exonerates the victims and it places, because it blames the victims and it exonerates the oppressor and the occupier. By peace, I mean a two-state solution, and the biggest obstacle to peace is the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. And the Israeli occupation is the most prolonged and brutal military occupation of modern times.
Point of information? China, since 1950, has been occupying Tibet much longer, even if you accept an Israeli occupation. So that's factually wrong.
I accept. But the colonial context is all important for this conflict. And the Palestinians conduct the last anti-colonial struggle in the world today. Israel prides itself on being a democracy, but because of the occupation, it's no longer a democracy, it's an ethnocracy, a country in which one ethnic group rules over another. And there is another word to describe this situation, apartheid. The present Israeli government is one of the most right-wing, xenophobic, and overtly racist governments in Israel's history. The ruling party is the Likud, and the Likud's manifesto at the last election explicitly rejects the idea of an independent Palestinian state. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated last week what he had believed all along, but dared not say. He said that only Jews have national rights in the land of Israel. This was following a cabinet decision on Sunday, which will introduce a bill to the Knesset, a basic law which defines Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and it would delist Arabic, the language of 20% of Israel's population, as an official language, and it will emphasize the Jewish character of the state at the expense of its democratic character. And Netanyahu's coalition partners, most of them, are much more extreme and fundamentalist than he is. So the right-wing makeup of the present government militates against the two-state solution. And all the policies of the present government are intended to prevent the emergence of an independent Palestinian state. This government is a very reluctant participant in the comatose peace process. The peace process is a charade. It's all process and no peace. But it's worse than a charade because it gives Israel just the cover that it needs to pursue its aggressive colonial project on the West Bank. The present government is hell-bent on settlement expansion, and settlement expansion is theft. Land grabbing and peacemaking don't go together. It's one or the other. And by its actions, if not by its words, this government has opted for land grabbing. This government has accelerated Jewish settlement in and around occupied Arab East Jerusalem in defiance of international law. This government continues to build the wall on the West Bank. It calls it a security barrier, and it claims that its purpose is security, but a much more important purpose of the wall is land grabbing. The wall is illegal. Maybe good fences make good neighbors, but not when the fence is built in the middle of the neighbor's garden. So Netanyahu is like the man who pretends to be negotiating the division of a pizza while he keeps eating it. There is no Palestinian leader, however moderate, who is prepared to make peace on these ludicrous terms. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza. This was not a contribution to peace. It was a unilateral Israeli move, and it was part of an attempt by Israel to redraw unilaterally the borders of Greater Israel. The first step was the withdrawal from Gaza, and the second step was to expand and consolidate Israel's control over the West Bank.
Okay, before that, at gusto ko lang po ma-mention na, parang konting background lang po. Ano po, since 1967, pagkatapos po na nanalo sa giyera ang Israel, dahil meron pong giyera na nangganap po noon panahon, ang Israel po nag-occupy po ng West Bank at ng Gaza Strip. At sa panahon po ngayon, ang nagkaroon po ng pamamalakad po sa mga state na ito ay ang Hamas nga po. Although nagkaroon po ng mga blockades po dito, both ang Egypt yata at ang Israel noong 2007.
They demolished 4 settlements in the West Bank when they withdrew from Gaza in 2005 as well. Explain that, please.
Okay, because Israel withdrew from Gaza and destroyed the houses, which is a strange gesture of brotherhood and a strange gesture towards peace with the Palestinians. And no, you've had your say. Israel withdrew 8,000 settlers from Gaza, and in the following year, Israel introduced 12,000 new settlers in the West Bank. So as far as the Gazans were concerned, the result of this magnanimous Israeli gesture was to turn Gaza, to turn the Strip into an open-air prison. Since the withdrawal from Gaza, Israel has launched 3 military campaigns against Gaza with very heavy casualties. In the last war in Gaza over the summer, there were 2,100 casualties, 80% of them civilians, and 577 of them were children. Israel also inflicted massive material damage on Gaza, which is estimated at £5 billion. Israel presents its military operations in Gaza as part of a war against terror. But it is these military operations themselves that are cruel acts of state terrorism. In the course of these 3 wars, Israel has committed war crimes, and they are documented in the Goldstone report.
Point of information.
No.
Goldstone retracted his report.
No, absolutely not. He did not. He changed his mind about one episode, but his report, which is 575 pages, and I read it from start to finish, his report documents 33 episodes, and not 1, not 2, not 3, but a whole series of Israeli war crimes. During the last phase of the last Gaza war, the Israeli army launched a really vicious attack on civilians in Rafah. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon described it as a moral outrage and a criminal act. And I would regard these words as an appropriate description of Israel's entire policy towards Gaza. Israeli generals speak about their operations in Gaza as mowing the lawn. This is a very grim metaphor, and in any case, a very curious way of bringing about peace with the Palestinians. I served in the IDF in the mid-1960s, and I served loyally and proudly because in my time, the IDF was true to its name. It was the Israel Defense Forces. But as a result of the occupation, the IDF was transformed into the brutal police force of a brutal colonial power. The ultimate aim of all these policies is politicized to deny the Palestinians any independent existence in Palestine. Let me turn briefly to Hamas. Hamas is not ISIS. ISIS is a jihadist organization. Hamas is no, I don't have time. Hamas is a local organization with a local agenda. And under international law, the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation, and Hamas is the vanguard of this resistance. Israel brands Hamas as a terrorist organization, but initially it supported it. Subsequently, it turned against Hamas, and it has been practicing ever since the imperial policy of divide and rule. To conclude,
Time.
Hamas is an Islamic resistance movement ready for negotiations leading to a two-state solution.
Patapos na rin po kasi yung speaker dito sa negative side, which agrees more with Hamas as not the threat to peace in the region. So gusto ko lang po i-mention na both speakers, hindi sila gano'ng nag-dwell dun sa main talaga na hinihingi ng topic. In fact, palagay ko, sa pacing nila dun sila nagka-problema. Eto nagka-problema din to si Professor Shlaim, and also nagka-problema din si Dennis Prager kanina dahil yung focus nila, kunwari kay Prager kanina, was focusing more on what he thinks about the proposition na para sa kanya hindi maganda yung proposition na parang insulto sa kanya yun. On the other hand, kay Professor Shlaim ganun din. Ang focus niya first is on what Israel is doing, and then yung second part, which is na gahol na nga sa oras dito, is yung pag-establish na Hamas as a local organization with local agenda. So ako personally, looking at the topic, mas gusto ko sana na mas nag-focus siya doon sa Hamas bilang organization, what Hamas is all about. Pero yun nga, gahol nga sa oras eh. So pacing po yung naging problema po ng dalawang speaker na ito. But on the other hand, para sa akin, it was very clear for me, mas maganda yung presentation sa akin ni Shlaim. Para sa akin, mas academic kumpara sa presentation ni Dennis Prager. Si Prager is more on the common sense, the more emotion yung kanyang attack.
Israel is a reactionary and racist colonial power which relies on brute military force to impose its apartheid regime on the Palestinians. Israel is the main obstacle to peace, and I reject this motion with some vehemence.
Okay.
Mishana, is that correct? Yes. Thank you. I started well. Dennis, and all my other fellow Americans,
So konting notes lang po, etong second speaker po, ang final speaker po para po sa pro-Israel ay si Shmuley Boteach. Yan po yung pangalan niya. So pakinggan natin.
Happy Thanksgiving. And Billy and Jimmy are out having their Thanksgiving picnic when Billy is suddenly bit right on the butt by a giant snake. And Jimmy says, "I'll save your life. I'll run to the doctor." He goes to the doctor. "You have to come quickly." The doctor says, "I have too many patients," but it's simple. Draw an X on the point where the bite and the venom went in, and then pucker up your lips and suck out every last drop of poison. Jimmy runs back to Billy, and Billy says, "What did the doctor say?" And Jimmy says, "He says you're going to die." My friends, nobody disputes that poison has been injected into the Middle East. The only question is, who is the serpent? And I've heard Catherine and Mishana tell me repeatedly that Hamas may be bad people, as if you can classify those who shoot gay men in the head as just bad people. As if you can classify those who aid and abet honor killings of Muslim women for doing nothing but falling in love just bad people. As if you could excuse, for shame, those who took 21 innocent Palestinians on the last day of the war in Gaza, not Israelis, not Jews, and before the eyes of the world shot them in the head because they dared protest against Hamas. As if you can simply call them bad people. As if you could take an organization that would take Jews who live here in Great Britain, students at Oxford who happen to carry the name Jew, and write a charter calling for the extermination and annihilation of every last one, just bad people. My God, if a Jew did that, I would call it an abomination. If a Jew did that, I would be sickened and I would never defend it. And I would call it what it is. I would call it evil incarnate. But it's not Hamas's fault, you see. You see, Hamas is the serpent that was created by Israel. They've only turned to violence because of the occupation. They've turned to violence because of the military checkpoints and the human degradation. You know, one of the great honors I had in my life was 2 weeks ago when I traveled to Birmingham, Alabama, in celebration of the life of Martin Luther King Jr. And I was on a panel with a man who spoke in this incredible chamber. And what an honor it is to be back, Mr. President. Thank you so much for giving me that privilege of coming back to the Oxford Union. I spent 11 years of my life in this great city. 6 of my 9 children were born in Oxford, and I love this tradition of people sitting and breaking bread, although they disagree. Not that we really disagree. Because in a democracy, you have the right to express your opinion. And Mishana, you have the right to be wrong. And I respect that right. I respect it fully and I honor it. But I was on the panel with a man named the Dalai Lama. And you know what? He has been under military occupation by a country called China since, let's see, 1950. Even if you believe that the Palestinians are under military occupation in that they honored, you'd have to say they honored the Oslo I and Oslo II Accords, where Israel gave Yasser Arafat control of 97% of the Palestinian population, which it remains till this day. And still, it turned out that Israel lost 1,000 citizens, equivalent to 60,000 Americans. In 1 year, blown to smithereens. Maybe Israel has a right to be a little bit weary of these peace deals. But even if you say that Israel is completely occupying the Palestinians, why didn't the Dalai Lama start blowing people up? Why is he a voice for peace? You have no choice. Once you're degraded, you've lost all moral choice. You have to become a murderer. God Almighty, was anyone more terrorized than the people of your incredible country in the years 1940 to 1941 in the Battle of Britain? Was anyone more terrorized than the citizens of London who faced Hitler's Luftwaffe bombs on a nightly basis? Did Britain send suicide bombers into nurseries? And by the way, Israel never even contemplated getting anywhere near how the Allies responded in Japanese and German cities. You speak about Israel precision bombs. What do you want Israel to be? God? Technology is advanced, but it's not that advanced. You see, when I came to Oxford tonight, it's interesting. I passed Magdalen, I passed New, I passed the exam schools. Where was the Air Force Base? Catherine, I'm just getting warmed up right now. You gotta wait a few minutes. I'm just getting started. Where is the Air Force Base underneath this chamber? Where are the rocket launchers? Does Britain build its nuclear silos in the middle of St. John's? What is Hamas doing having military command posts under hospitals? Who does that to children? Who makes kids into bulletproof vests? And by the way, who asks children to stay there even after the imperialist Jews inform them that a bomb is coming? Who tells them that if you leave, you will be shot? Who does television broadcasts that announces to the Palestinian children that they have an obligation to give their, quote, head and shoulders to the Palestinian cause, that they must martyr themselves? Again, if any Jew said that to a Jewish child, let alone a Palestinian child created equally in the image of God, I would call it an abomination.
Okay, before that, no, my only concern dito, I understand that he's trying to paint Hamas as an evil organization. Para sa akin, hindi lang nga bad guy. They are the organization that would shoot homosexuals, kills gays, kills people for honor killing, would shoot the people who would leave. So, yan yung mga examples niya na para sa kanya, what makes Hamas evil. So, yun ang kanyang way, no, na strategy ng pagpaint ng picture. Although, I understand that, but isn't it because of their natural resistance to the occupation of Israel in their countries? Sinabi niya kanina, bakit yung mga Tibetan monks hindi naman katulad ni Dalai Lama, hindi naman nag-resort into violence? Well, that's one way of reacting to an occupation, to be passive, but I think violence is also a way of reacting to resistance. Although what Boteach here is saying, patungkol sa ginagawa ng Hamas sa kanilang sariling people, yun ang interesting din sa akin. Dahil so far, ang sinabi dito ni Boteach ay hindi lamang sa ginagawa ng Hamas laban sa Israel, kundi ang ginagawa nila sa sariling tao nila, sa kanilang sariling mga civilians.
The fact is, Catherine, I'm not warmed up just yet, but I will be. My friends, the fact is, that Islam is a great world religion. And I'm not concerned about Hamas in Israel. You're correct, Catherine. Israel's a strong country. We learned after the Second World War we had no choice. We learned after seeing some of the reactions in the room tonight that we couldn't rely on other people to protect us. And God bless the IDF. But I will tell you,
Defense Force.
you know who I'm really worried about, to be honest? The proposition tonight is that Hamas or Israel is responsible for the peace. It didn't say which peace, though. I'm really worried about my Muslim brothers and sisters. I'm worried about their peace. Israel is strong. It will be strong. It'll continue to be strong. It has no choice. But I ask you, who is going to protect Muslim women should Israel decide, should all the Jews in the Middle East decide, you know, this is just too tough a neighborhood. Miami Beach, where I grew up, much more beautiful. We're just going to leave and finally go to America or come to England. If Israel were to leave the Middle East and cease to exist, I ask you a question. Who is going to protect Islamic women from honor killings, which only don't happen in Israel? Who is going to protect Palestinian homosexuals who are accused of being collaborators and are murdered? And you don't hear almost any objection. Who's going to protect Arab and Muslim women who want to get educated? We just had a Nobel Prize winner who got shot in the head. You see, I agree with you. You're part of a great world religion. God bless you for standing up for it. I'm a religious man. I respect that. Don't let anyone contaminate your religion, even if they're part of that same religion. Islam, through Sultan Saladin, was the first to give real rights to prisoners of war, to treat them like human beings. But we heard a defense of ISIS violating Islam by cutting off people's heads. That, my friends, is an abomination, not to Judaism, and not to Christianity, not to atheism, not to agnosticism. It is an abomination to Islam. The Quran says that every human life is sacred. The Quran says that hatred of any religious entity is a sin. Muslims took in my people in Istanbul in 1492 when Catholic Spain kicked us out. Muslims took in my people when we were kicked out of Portugal in 1498. And there are Jewish communities in Muslim countries till this very day. My father grew up in Iran, and there was no Holocaust in a Muslim land. And there were no crusades and expulsions. So how could my fellow Muslims sitting here today, part of such a glorious tradition, defend an organization that calls for a second Holocaust of the Jews? This isn't a threat to Judaism. This is a threat to Islam. It's a violation of Islam.
Interesting. Wow. Kasi we have to understand that Hamas is quote-unquote Islamist fundamentalist na grupo. So sinasabi niya dito na ang ginagawa ng Hamas ay also pagbibigay ng hindi magandang pangalan sa Islam mismo. Para sa kanya, it's an abomination. Dapat na protektahan ng mga kapwa niya, ng mga scholars. Na bakit sinusuportahan ng mga Muslim ang annihilation? Sinusuportahan ang isang organisasyon na nag-pledge, nagnangako na uubusin ang mga Israelita. Uubusin ang mga citizens ng Israel. Sa kanya hindi niya lubos maisip ito, which is actually a very valid point too.
And when you ask me, Catherine, where was Israel for the past 60 years? What were they doing? You know what, Catherine? They were simply trying to survive. It wasn't easy. You see, in 1947, the UN voted, excuse me, just give me a minute here. In 1947, excuse me, thank you very much. 1947, the UN, and this week is the anniversary, Catherine. We will continue this over drinks. In 1947, the UN voted for 2 states. The Jews accepted it. Catherine, you'll have to tell me over drinks why the Arabs did not. The 1936 Peel Commission. The Jews accepted a division of the land. The Arabs did not. 1967, Israel conquered all this land after an annihilatory war launched on them, especially from Jordan, who wasn't even part of the war. And Moshe Dayan says 4 days later, we want to give it all back. West Bank, Gaza. Gaza's given back already. You know how the Arabs responded? They met in Khartoum in Sudan a month later. Everyone knows the story. 3 no's. No negotiations, no peace, no recognition. Israel withdrew from Gaza completely in 2005. But Hamas is not interested in peace. Hamas is interested in contaminating a great world religion by being more interested in seeing the spilling of blood. And that's what sickens me about the ISIS beheadings. You know what sickens me? It's the glee with which they murder. And even if Hamas were to get up and say, you know what, we value Jewish life. We value Jewish life. But we just are upset that we're being treated. I could even somehow make sense of this. Because if any Jew got up and said, if they would ululate when rabbis are killed, I would be disgusted. Muslims are created in God's image as are Jews. We must condemn any organization that targets civilians for murder. There are no excuses. Morality is now, it's universal, it's for all time. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Okay, I like how he mentioned the backgrounder na gusto ng Israel na magkaroon ng estado ng Palestine. Noon pa, 1940s pa, nagkaroon ng two-state pero ang mga Arabs mismo, ang mga powers that be, mga puwersang sumusuporta nung panahon na yon ay hindi nila inaccept. Ilang beses according kay Rabbi Boteach na gusto ng Israel na magkaroon ng separate na state. Sige, mag-withdraw kami sa Gaza. Nag-withdraw sila noong 2005. Pero para sa kanya, hindi niya mawari bakit gustong-gusto talaga ng mga Hamas na atakihin, sirain at ubusin ang mga Israelita sa Israel. So I think nagiging consistent yung mga sinasabi ni Rabbi Boteach doon sa sinabi ni Dennis Prager kanina patungkol sa kagustuhan ng isang free state na magkaroon ng peace. Mas likely yon na isang free state ang magusto ng kapayapaan kumpara sa isang police state na katulad ng Hamas na gugustuhin quote-unquote ang kapayapaan. Para sa kanila, hindi kapayapaan ang naging goal ng Hamas. Sa akin nagiging clear, especially yung last parts ng sinasabi ni Rabbi Boteach. So ito naman, pakinggan natin ang last speaker, Mishana, Hosseinioun. Yan po yung pangalan po ng magiging last speaker dito.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, rest assured, the proposition tonight is designed to fail, and it will, without our doing, because the truth cannot be debated, cannot be argued. It is self-evident. The proposition is built to fail because it is false. It assumes there is a peace process underway and that there are entities, namely Hamas, undermining it. Ladies and gentlemen, a more accurate reading of tonight's proposition would be that Hamas is an obstacle to Israel's monopoly on peace. And peace, according to Robert Fisk, will not give Israel more land, which is its actual undeniable raison d'être. Of course, Hamas is an obstacle to peace in the Israeli worldview,
Raison
not
d'être.
to peace proper.
I love that French
Because
word.
peace for Israel is code for peace and quiet. That is to say, their unchallenged rule over Greater Israel. And more today, peace is code for RIP, rest in peace for the Palestinians, meaning the slow but steady ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. But if we're talking about a just peace, then let us be fair. A just peace means remembering what things were like before the Israeli occupation of Palestine, even if we can't imagine what peace would look like in the future. Things were peaceful before Israel came onto the scene as an occupying power and proceeded to violate the terms of all of its international obligations as an occupying power.
Okay, quick question, no? Sa mga knowledgeable po natin ng mga historians dyan, alam ko po sa inyo, marami po sa inyo matatalino ng mga viewers po natin. How was the situation before, quote-unquote, the Israeli occupation? Ano kaya ang buhay nila ng mga tao sa Palestine prior to the coming of the Jews? Tandaan po natin na ang Jerusalem po ay isa sa mga pinaka-strange na lugar dahil po tatlo po sa atin pong pinakamalaking relihiyon. Major religions, Christianity, Judaism, at saka Islam ay may significant na importance po sa kanila ang lugar po ng Israel, especially ang lugar po ng Jerusalem. So gusto ko pong malaman, yun nga, kumusta naman kaya ang Palestine nung under sila ng Hamas? Tandaan po natin, ang Hamas na po ang meron pong control sa mga lugar na ito. So kumusta naman sila ngayon? At nung nabalik na ba sa Gaza Strip at sa West Bank ang pamamalakad ng mga Hamas, which is a local fundamentalist group, mas naging okay ba ito para sa kanila? Masasabi ba natin na dahil under na sila ng Hamas, ay almost the same na ba ito prior to the occupation ng Israel?
The Arabs and the Jews lived peacefully side by side one another before the forceful Zionist takeover and iron wall policy of land grabbing and violence ensued. If anything, Israel created the conditions for the rise and popularity of Hamas, propping it up in the late 80s to weaken the PLO and undermine the First Intifada, as leaked cables indicate. It has since switched tones and today labels its once ally Hamas a terrorist organization to further undermine the Palestinians' national liberation efforts. Thus, it is unlikely that Hamas would have emerged in the absence of the doings and misdeeds of the occupying authorities. There would also be no Hamas, if I may finish, please, thank you. There would also be no Hamas to speak of, no peace obstructed, and no debate to be had were it not for Israel. If they negotiated with Hamas then, surely they can negotiate with them now. But as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, peace with Hamas is not desired. Even if today Hamas is the biggest thorn in Israel's side, as I'm sure it is, a threat to their zero-sum notion of peace, they are, after all, the legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people, freely and fairly elected in elections monitored by international observers such as the Carter Center. Can I finish? Thank you. And recognition of Palestinian statehood by the UN and also the UK Parliament and more members of the international community is reaffirming Palestine's sovereignty and by extension, its right to protect its sovereignty and borders at all costs. Hamas has a right, whether you agree or not, and whether you classify it as a terrorist organization to strip it of its legitimacy as a political actor, it has an obligation to defend its people against Israeli aggression in order to maintain the peace, a just peace. I'd like to finish, thank you. What we are witnessing today are the side effects of an illegal occupation and ongoing crimes against humanity. The violence exhibited, even amongst the Palestinian brothers against brothers, is symptomatic of a one-sided Israeli encroachment on Palestinian land, life, and liberty. If actions exhibited by Hamas are deemed terroristic, it is not happening in a vacuum. It's in direct response to the disproportionate pressures which the Palestinian populace has sustained at the hands of Israel and its revisionist Zionist policies of divide, conquer, carry on. Shall I show you the maps over the decades of the ever-shrinking Palestinian territories to help you decide who is the greater obstacle to peace? There's hardly anything left of it, so I left it at home. When Israel has undermined all efforts at a Palestinian unity government, again, as leaked documents reveal, and also very public statements by officials unabashedly show, when it has erected a wall, capital W, that the International Court of Justice has deemed illegal, and when it has waged innumerable acts of unprovoked and unwarranted aggression against the Palestinians, the majority of them innocent women and children, when it is armed to the teeth with advanced weaponry and bankrolled by the United States of America in the upwards of billions of dollars, coming, I'm ashamed to say, from my own tax dollars as an American. Hamas, by contrast, is a paltry little group that started out as a guerrilla organization, troubled with internal corruption, as they may be today, but that has won some popular legitimacy and has abandoned its more militant ways for a more conciliatory platform of moderation, but is still rejected at the peace tables. There will be no peace for as long as the unilateral Israeli policies persist. And as long as the world turns a blind eye to the plight of the Palestinians and gives Israel carte blanche to do to Arabs as was once done to the Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to finish. Ladies and gentlemen, a vote in support of tonight's motion means you are contributing to the very cycle of blame that fuels this manufactured conflict, a cycle that is entirely avoidable, may I add, and that depends on the complicity of this House in order to persist. This is the greatest obstacle to peace, and I, for one, will not stand for it. Please join us not in opposition, but on the third proverbial bench of truth and justice, and vote against the proposition not to be anti-Israel or for Hamas, but simply to extricate yourselves peacefully from a debate that is toxic and obsolete, and to help pave the way to a just peace for all, which is the only type of peace there can ever be after all. Thank you.
Alright, dyan naman po magtatapos mga ka-youth ang ating episode ngayon, and we decided po na magkaroon ng isang Filipino or Tagalog commentary po patungkol nga po sinasabing debate. Hindi po ito yung full debate mga ka-youth dahil hindi po natin makita actually yung nasa Oxford Union po na YouTube channel. Ang nakalagay po doon is yung mga speakers na po mismo, and I think mas maging exciting pa siguro yung laban kung napanood natin yung full debate. Kaso nga po wala po tayong available po na source video po sa buong debate. But sa atin pong debate ngayon, maganda po ang naging flow ng debate. Ganito po ang isang pong uri ng parliamentary debate po. So hindi po ito Oxford, Oregon katulad po sa iba na kung saan merong cross-examination. Yung nangyari po sa kanilang format ay pwede pong mag-raise ng point of information. Yan po yung pagtayo ng isa pang debater at pwede po siyang i-acknowledge po ng speaker kung meron po siyang clarification or question. Kaya po napansin niyo po sa whole debate may mga tumatayo po. Even from the audience, ganun po kasi ang style po ng parliamentary debate sa Britain. So sa Oxford University po nangyari ang debate na ito. Para sa akin, mahirap po mag-judge dahil maghusay po talaga yung mga speakers na ito. Both both sides po, they were able to present good arguments para kina Prager at kay Rabbi Boteach. Sinasabi nga nila na mas evil ang Hamas at binigyan ng tsansa ng Israel na magkaroon ng mga referendum, ng pagkakaroon ng recognition sa state ng Palestine. Pero sa mga accords na nangyari, hindi naman umaagree yung mga Arabs kasi nga mga Arabs po mga taga-suporta po ng Palestinian po na state. So sinasabi ni na Prager at ni Rabbi Boteach na hindi naman umaagree yung mga Arab Kaya ito ang ginagawa ng Israel state. Dahil meron kayong promise na uubusin nyo kami, meron kaming mga blockade na nilagay noong 2007. Hanggang ngayon po, nang ipon nangyayari. Although tandaan po natin na ang Israel state pa rin po ang may effective na occupation po ng mga lugar na ito. Although ang Hamas po ngayon ang nagkaroon ng kapangyarihan na mamahala. Ito po ay isang Islamic fundamentalist group. Although interestingly, napansin ko lang yung si Mishana, yung last speaker, nakita ko yung buhok niya na walang hijab, walang covering. I highly doubt if that is allowed in an Islamic fundamentalist society. Sa isang Islamic fundamentalist society, napaka-stricto po nila na hindi po pwede makita kahit isang piraso po ng gabuhok ng babae. At yun nga, I have to agree with the pro-Israel side na sinabi nga nila as to the strictness ng mga Hamas at ng iba pang mga Islamic fundamentalist na mga police state. Talaga pong napaka-stricto po sa kanila pong mga lugar. Although, pwede nating isipin yan na, ano ngayon kung stricto sila, kanila namang kultura yon, kanila namang estado yon. So, anong pakialam ng Israel doon? Ang sinasabi nila, kung stricto kami, di bigyan mo kami ng kalayaan, bigyan mo kami ng karapatan na mag-exist. Yun ang sinasabi naman ng Palestinian side. Sa negative side naman po, pinapakita naman nila sa pamamagitan nga po ng speech ni Professor Shlaim at Professor Mishana. So, sinasabi nga nila dito na hindi, Israel talaga ang may problema. Sa napakatagal na debate, sabi nga ni Mishana, obsolete debate. What we need is a concrete solution talaga. Siyempre, na-blame din ni Mishana yung involvement nga ng America, which is highly sided to Israel. In fact, they are sending like 2.4 billion or 3 billion US dollars every year as a support to Israel's defenses. Ganun po ka-high-tech po kasi talaga ang protection po ng Israel. Interestingly, sa mga nangyayari ngayon, hindi ko po alam kung ano po kaya ang main reason bakit nagkaroon ng isang coordinated, highly sophisticated po na attack po ang Hamas sa Israel ngayon. Yan nga po ang current na situation natin. Meron tayong nababasa na, is it because of the currently pending na Saudi-Israel deal? So, hindi ko po alam yung background po, ano po yung resistance na nangyayari po mula po sa Hamas, or is it just because they're just so fed up kaya they decided to really attack, sending more than 3,000, 4,000 rockets in different territories, umabot ng Tel Aviv and parang parts pa po yata ng Jerusalem at ng Beersheba din, kung di ako nagkakamali. So magulo po ngayon ang Israel, kaya po we decided to make this debate discussion just for us to have a background on why this is happening right now sa atin pong society. And sana po ito po mabigyan ng solusyon. I have to agree with the primer with Professor Richard Haydarian dun sa atin pong Stand for Truth primer kanina. The root cause should be solved. Hindi po enough yung mga ceasefire, hindi po enough yung violence, of course, kasi violence begets violence. Yun po ang nangyayari ngayon, di ba po? So, para po sa akin, sana mabigyan po ng solusyon yan. Sana po magkaroon po sila ng pagkakaintindihan dahil napakahirap po talaga, sa Middle East, dahil 1970s, 1960s hanggang ngayon, wala pa rin pong pagbabago sa kanila pong lugar. Napakagulo po. Sana po magkaroon po ng mas fair na pag-recognize ng kanilang mga karapatan, both ng Israel at ng mga Palestinian. Tandaan po natin sa konsepto po ng terrorism, mga political action po na pag-intimidate at pag-threaten na nangyayari nga ngayon sa Israel, na pwede po kasing you can look at it in a different way. Sabi nga ni Nelson Mandela, diba, na a person's terrorist may be another person's freedom fighter. Mga ka-U3, maraming salamat po sa mga nanonood po ng U3. I'm very grateful. Nakakalula po talagang numbers po natin. 1.2 to 1.3 million po in the last 28 days. Ganyan po karami. Million po ang pinag-uusapan natin nanonood po ng Usap Usap University. Kaya mga ka-U3, I'm very thankful. Pero yung subscriber count natin, nasa 50,000 lang. So, maging part po kayo ng atin pong community sa mga nagiging members po, yung mga paid members ng U3 Basic, U3 Solid. Maraming salamat. And naghihintay pa ako ng U3 Gold. Dahil sa U3 Gold po, meron po kayong free merchandise po. Meron po kayong free t-shirt mula po sa akin. Kaya hanggang sa muli po, maraming salamat po sa panonood mga ka-U3. If you like these contents, please don't forget to click subscribe. Please don't forget to click this video. May mga discussions po tayo dito at dito rin po. Maraming salamat po. Peace. Bye-bye.